Ladies and gentlemen, I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran, and it is August 12th, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update, and we are going to see, first off, if the Kherson offensive is finally officially underway, and more importantly, we're going to be breaking down what is going on at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and we are going to answer the question, could another Chernobyl happen at that power plant? Let's get into it. So first and foremost, of course, let's pull up the tactical map. There's been only one significant change, but it is, I think, significant, and that is in the town of Blahoddatne. You can see it has been officially liberated. Now, I think this is significant because if you've been following this channel, you know that the Ukrainian Department of Defense, their military command, has said repeatedly that Kherson is the site of a counteroffensive. It's been probably 6, maybe 8 weeks that they've been talking about it. But the truth is, anywhere really east of this river here, there's been no official progress updates, none. And so this is the first time we've seen an actual confirmation that a village outside of Kherson has been liberated. Now, obviously, there's a long way to go. But it's a sign that perhaps the Ukrainian forces are willing to disclose their victories. And, I think it's important in the sense that you have to remember that there's what happens on the ground, and then there's what is officially known. And Russia is also a master of this, but in these cases, I think that there may be more action on the ground, but Ukraine is reluctant to officially plant the flag and declare, yes, this area has been liberated, unless they are absolutely certain it won't get pushed back by a Russian counterattack. I think it's even possible that they may disclose more and more liberated villages in the coming days or weeks, in order to demonstrate repeated, steady progress, even if, in fact, it's been a little while and these villages have been under Ukrainian control for some time. None of that would shock me. Of course, it's also just possible that this is what they've taken. This is the start of the counteroffensive, and that the talk of counteroffensives up until this point has been in the preparatory phase. They've been, as discussed, attacking bridges and supply lines, damaging critical air assets, air bases, positioning their forces, establishing stockpiles. That's a very Soviet way of doing things, is to have a huge stockpile of munitions in preparation for an offense. The U.S. is a little different. We operate in sort of like a forward battle type doctrine, where our forces go and our logistics fight to keep up. It's called push versus pull logistics. Pull logistics are when the unit in the field says, hey, be advised, I need more 155 rounds, and then the logistics chain pushes those 155s up. In Soviet doctrine, it's a push logistics, where you have your frontline forces and you have all the munitions, the medical supplies, the food. It's all behind them, and as they advance, the logistics advance with them. They don't need to ask for more. They just try to always have more available. It's a different system, and it's easier in most ways. Like logistically easier, way easier to plan, way easier to deal with. But U.S. military, we got to run it like Amazon. And in Amazon, you order your Chinese-made fly swatters, and in 48 hours, someone's bringing them to you. Anyway. That is interesting. But what's more interesting is when you look at the news, we see that obviously the Ukraine and Russia trade blame for risk of disaster at frontline power plant. And this is a discussion, if you don't know, the power plant that is right here near the city of Bakhmut that has recently been seized. It's right here on the north end of this reservoir. And it is one of the largest power plants in the world, and it's obviously, you can see it is just meters from the front line, and obviously Russia is going to use this as a fighting location. It's secure, it's a lot of buildings, It's been contested for some time, and the Russians have not been able to sort of close this gap despite several days of trying, which they need to do in order to establish the front line. They really need to push on Bakhmut. So the fighting here is a critical area, especially for Russia, which means that there's considerable danger of damage to this power plant. Now, I don't believe that this is that there's not really a potential for a Chernobyl-style disaster. Now, there's other disasters that can happen, believe you me. But okay, so it says here that actually there are workers operating the plant, even though it's under Russian occupation, though the power station was struck 5 times on Thursday, including near where radioactive materials are stored. Now, let's talk about the disaster that it can and cannot happen. It is extremely unlikely, borderline impossible, to accidentally have this reactor go critical. Now, why do I say that? Well, the plant is actually 6 VVER 1000 pressurized light water reactors. And when we look at the VVER system, this was designed after the Chernobyl disaster. It's a range of reactors, right? But this is all of which were designed after the design for Chernobyl. And the Chernobyl disaster occurred because of a bunch of reasons, but fundamentally, the reason the reactor was able to go critical was because there weren't enough moderating rods in the reactor. What happens is, basically, some reactors, when left in their default state with no moderating rods, no moderating material, the reaction will get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then explode, turn into a bomb. That's actually how nuclear weapons are made. They just push the material together and allow the fission reaction to rapidly accelerate and then blow up. And so you need to find a sweet spot. In old reactors, there's a sweet spot where the nuclear material was dense enough that you had a continuously ongoing fission reaction, but it wasn't so dense that it went critical and exploded. So in order to achieve that sort of sweet spot, what they would do is have the material very close together, and they would use big graphite rods to absorb some of the neutrons. So that way, every time you withdrew a rod, you could make the reaction a little bit hotter, and it let you moderate the output of your power plant, just like you need a lot of power to run your AC in the summer and less power to run nothing at night in the spring. So being able to withdraw these rods to increase the burn rate, so to speak, of the fission reaction is a way to run a reactor. But there's some problems. As discussed, when the control rods are damaged, you might not be able to slow a reaction that's starting to run away on you. How did they solve this problem? Well, they solved it with the VVERS, or the VVER system. And these are a type of Gen 3 reactors that have a really important trait. And I'm going to see if I can find specifically what it's called here. It's called a negative void coefficient. Okay, and a negative void coefficient just means that when there are voids in the reactor, right, when there's gaps, it means that the reaction can't happen. The reaction cannot take place. And so in like Chernobyl, right, you pulled out a rod, there was a gap. And that gap meant that the fission reaction got hotter. Instead, in these reactors, they're moderated by light water, regular water. And the regular water not just moderates the neutrons running around, breaking things up, causing fission, but they also cool the reactor. So, but what happens when there's gaps, voids? So when that water starts to boil and forms little pockets of gas, well, because of how the reactor is designed, they were able to create a reactor that cannot sustain fission when there's pockets of gas. So if the worst case scenario were to happen, all 3 containment layers were to somehow be breached in the power plant, the core itself was to lose its moderating substance, the reaction would stop. It would just stop. Now, that is not to say that there is no chance of a disaster. I want to be clear. This is, one, reactors are complex things, and they are just like any other controlled explosion. You know, there is always a way things can go badly. And remember, this is still a power plant with a lot of radioactive material. And even if you have that fission reaction stop, there's still a lot of dangerous radioactive material that would be a pretty big disaster for that region if, let's say, the entire reservoir was to be contaminated with radioactive waste, if a large area was to be contaminated with radioactive waste, even if radioactive material was to be aerosolized and scattered into the air and pass along the jet stream. That would be a disaster for large parts of Eastern Europe, potentially. Now, again, it wouldn't rise to the level of a Chernobyl disaster, but that doesn't mean that there's not considerable danger of a radiological event, right? Look at Fukushima for an example of a power plant that experienced it didn't go critical, right? It wasn't a Chernobyl level event, but the region around Fukushima 10 years on is still uninhabitable. Lots of people who were in the area, even naval ships off the coast of Fukushima reported that their sailors experienced considerable health effects. So it's not the risk. There are risks of significant radiological events, but don't listen to the fearmongers who are telling you that, you know, this reactor could go critical. There are safety mechanisms that are very robust, that in many ways, the more destroyed the reactor gets, the slower the reactor can be. Again, if the actual reaction containment housing was to be breached and was to lose all of its coolant and all of its moderating substance, the reaction would just sort of peter out. So anyway, guys, I hope you appreciate the fact that, you know, this breakdown. Again, I am not a nuclear expert. I've taken a couple of courses from the IAEA on nuclear safeguards, so I know a little bit. Otherwise, I wouldn't feel comfortable talking about this particular issue. And again, with the caveat, there's always another level to understanding anything, especially nuclear reactors. And so, right, there could be safety ways to circumvent these safety mechanisms that I don't understand. But you can feel good knowing that, well, the worst case scenario is not as bad as Chernobyl, probably. Anyway, guys, if you want to check out some combat videos that are just too spicy for YouTube, I do breakdowns on the Patreon around twice a month, every 2 weeks. Thanks to my Lieutenant tier patrons. I'll catch you guys in the next one.